Right, welcome to Ian and Stephen from Wilkin Chapman, solicitors from Wilkin Chapman. I'm so pleased you found the time to get down here to have a chat. Now, you're both involved in property, a lot involved in property, and so much going on in Grimsby at the moment, or right across North East Lincolnshire. But look, I have a question, because before coming to meet with you, I was talking to people about property. And one thing that kept coming up is people actually don't know the difference between what a conveyancer does and what a solicitor does. So now you do both of these things. So come on. Supposed to know what is the difference?
Well, I'll take this because I'm both.
Okay, all right.
Kind of interchangeable terms. So obviously a solicitor is someone who's qualified through the solicitor route, which both me and Ian have. Conveyancer is more of a broad term for the residential property arm. So you can be a conveyancer without being a solicitor. So obviously we have people in my team who have qualified through the Silex route, which is it's just an alternative route to solicitors.
Right.
We also have licensed conveyancers as well, which is another qualification route. So conveyance is probably just more of a broad term for conveyancing or residential property, which is the same sort of thing.
So is it better to, if I was taking on a commercial property, is it better to have a solicitor or a conveyancer, or does it not make any difference? What's that?
I think it makes any difference.
No, I mean commercial obviously. Well, I suppose commercial you probably hear the term conveyancer less as than residential property. But I'll be perfectly frank. I mean, I've obviously trained with people who haven't been solicitors and have vast experience, and there'll be many fantastic unqualified solicitor conveyancers out there. It's one of those really where it's slightly dangerous to always just say a solicitor and a conveyancer, because I may well have trained as a solicitor, but there'll be conveyancers with multiple years, 20, 30, maybe even more years experience as conveyancers who never actually qualified as solicitors.
So as ever, it's quite a nerve-wracking time, isn't it, when you're buying a property, especially for the first time, if you're buying a shop or an office blocks or whatever. It's quite nerve-wracking. And so I suppose what you're saying, it just comes down to checking out the firm that you're dealing with, making sure you've got the right person. It doesn't necessarily, whether they're conveyancer or solicitor.
I think it comes down to person as well. I have people who call up and they specifically ask for a solicitor. So I think that's maybe just perception more than anything. People might think, I need a solicitor, where, as Steve said, sometimes conveyancers can do the same job. So
and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because people throw these terms around liberally, depending on their experience, I suppose, and that's pretty much where it comes from. Okay, so that's clear. I think you just make a judgment. If any business is looking for it, you just make a judgment at the time, the person who fits your bill. I suppose if there's, because you're saying about depending on which one you could use either one, but if you've got some legal issues around the purchase of that building, is that a better time to use a solicitor if there are any complications?
Well, again, as Steve said, the experience side of things, someone who's been doing it for a while will probably come across complex issues anyway. So solicitors are the same. I deal mainly commercial, so my work that I do is slightly different from Steve. So commercial leases are different from a residential one. So someone might want a specific commercial solicitor to act for them, whereas a residential one obviously slightly different in that sense.
I guess that when you're buying a commercial property, there's going to be other bits and pieces to the whole idea of what you're going to be using it for, what planning it has, all those types of things.
Yeah, so obviously there might be a change of use that you need there if you're doing your business is different. Planning laws to think about. The leases that I deal with, obviously they're quite standard, but they're obviously tenants, if they're going in, they need to be aware of their obligations. So there's a lot in there. They are 30, 40 pages long, so there can be a hefty document to get through.
I know. Well, while we're on that subject, I've got to ask you. I mean, I recently came across a lease that we were dealing with a property, and honestly, the fact that it wasn't written on a scroll was the only thing that separated it from being something from history. The language in it was there were here-tos and hithertos and all those. Why is that still allowed to happen?
I mean, the old deeds, when you get them out of deed storage, they can go back a long time, can't they?
Yeah, we're Ian's probably slightly luckier than me. He's the one normally drafting the brand new leases.
Yeah, fresh paper.
With full words, and then I'll be picking up sometimes things like you said with shorthand. It's one of those. I appreciate it's something that as a sector they're looking to try to standardise leases, and obviously going forward with new ones, there's legislation in place now as to what what can and can't be in them.
Yeah.
But again, it's a real important area for our clients to make sure that they've got the right legal advice.
Yeah.
Because there can be, well, there's a multitude of issues that you need to consider when taking on a leasehold property, whether it be that your properties can be governed by a lease from the 1800s. Thankfully not as common. And there are obviously ways to rectify that and look to try to, get new leases put in place or extensions, etc. But yeah, they are certainly a fun part of our job.
I bet they are. I suppose it's a bit like it makes it scary, doesn't it? When you get 30 or 40 pages worth of, and you look at it and you don't understand 70% of it, it can be scary for someone taking on a property in the first place, residential or commercial, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, part of training is like when you're speaking to clients, trying to take away the legal jargon side of it, because obviously a lot of time it's trying to understand what you're being obligation-wise. So when we do a lease report, so the summary would be hopefully jargon-free, so it's more understandable from that side of things. Yeah. Whereas just reading the full lease from my point of view is, again, I've got used to it now, so I understand the terms and what's in there, but it's relaying that to the client and making sure they're aware. Yeah. So if you put a word in there that obviously they don't understand, then it doesn't help. So we need to try and take out the legal jargon side of it and just summarise it for them.
And I suppose that's just a matter of time. You've got to ease out the old leases and bring in the new leases over a period of time. I recall that there was a property that we dealt with once that had, I can't remember what they were called them, but there was basically it used to be owned by nuns and you couldn't ever serve alcohol on this, but that was one of the absolutely, I know it was right in the small print somewhere in that. Does that happen a lot, that kind of old clauses?
So that would be a restrictive covenant on the title.
That was the word.
That's the word. That one's probably one of the more common ones. We get quite a lot of properties that you can't use for a nuisance purpose or selling alcohol or using as a pub or tavern, which is usually the fun one. Yeah. But you can get quirky ones. I had one once where you weren't allowed to use it as a soap making facility. But from a long time ago. So someone obviously didn't like soap who had dealt with that property. But so again, that's just another part of our job, having to make sure that we extract those from the title for the clients and making sure that essentially when they're buying these properties, whether it be commercial or residential, that covenants like those or lease terms or whatever won't affect their use and enjoyment of the property going forward. It's a massive asset purchase, whether you're business or I look at it from individuals or sometimes obviously companies as well. But property is sometimes the biggest asset we own as individuals. So you need to make sure that not only are they right for your use, but you can use them freely going forward, whether it be remortgaging or selling. Really. And
the last thing you want to do is get caught in some years down the line when you've already invested in it, finding you can't move or can't do something that you want to do.
Absolutely.
Someone didn't read the lease.
And that's with the leaseholds, there's a lot more pitfalls and there's a lot more situations where you may find yourselves. Lenders are probably the biggest issues for us in terms of they change their requirements quite often. So what we might buy for a client, we have to make sure that not only is it fitting their purpose and it's good for them, but we have to kind of keep an eye on, even if they're not using a mortgage, if they are using a mortgage, that mortgage lender will have a set list of requirements, which we have to follow. But then we've kind of got to keep an eye on the future for them as well and say, well, look, you might sell to someone with a particular bank using it in the future. So this lease also has to make sure, it has to fit their guidelines as well. So we're a little bit fortune tellers sometimes as well, aren't we? Obviously that, appreciate sometimes on a commercial lease, it's for a shorter time usually, a set time, whereas the ones I pick up sometimes can be for 900 years. Wow. Most of my clients probably won't be around at that point. No. But
Unless they come up with something
maybe you never know
at some point. I mean that is you mentioned about leaseholders, because that's been in the news recently, hasn't it? Leasehold and freehold, and how they're looking to change that so there aren't people holding a leasehold that's only going to last another 10 years. Or there's a lot of movement in the area of law. Obviously, the last government had plans and they put certain things through, which they're still coming into effect. Most recently, I think they've a piece of legislation's come in now that scrapped what we call the 2-year rule. So when we're buying these leaseholds for people, it always used to be the case that in the first 2 years you were not statutorily entitled to extend the lease.
which is a process which neither of us really deal with. It's a different part of our firm, but where you serve notices on the landlords to actually get that, and the landlord, you still have to normally pay them a fee, but they can't refuse you to extend in your lease as long as you sort of serve the notices correctly, or your solicitor does. They've moved away from that now. So actually, when you're buying these, you can extend, and I believe in most cases, straight away.
And is there a control on the amount of fee you have to pay? Because sometimes the holders are...
There's a calculator.
There's a valuation, isn't
there's
there?
an evaluation. It all comes into probably a science behind the works that we don't deal with.
Surveyors would get involved in that. Surveyors would do the calculation of the amount of years left, and
so that's what's considered reasonable, I suppose. And
yeah, absolutely. Can be very hefty sums though, which is obviously again mindful. It's always dependent on the length that's left.
It becomes more expensive the lower it gets, isn't it?
Yeah. And then the ground, and again, that's something they're also looking at. They call it the marriage value. The lower the term goes, the higher in some instances the fee can be. But there's other factors that obviously come into it in terms of the type of property, the rent that's paid, because obviously that has a bearing, because usually when you extend the ground rent, which is again another pitfall. There's so many pitfalls. That would normally reduce to a peppercorn.
Right.
So in some instances, the landlords could be losing out quite a bit over the rest of the term of the lease.
Yeah.
They might be getting $250 or whatever a year for that. So there's a lot of factors that come into that kind of valuation process.
You've got to be so careful, even just that little bit of... I mean, I do see a lot in from a commercial perspective. I see a lot of challenges around leases. Businesses who have, in the enthusiasm of getting started or buying a property, they sign up to a 25-year lease and then find, because business does that, doesn't it? It changes, that they're suddenly stuck with that lease for a period of time. Do you come across that a lot?
Yeah, so obviously, again, business nature, isn't it? If the business doesn't work out, then if it's a new business, then obviously if you're taking a 25-year lease, you're very confident in what you're looking to do, probably. Yeah. So you can vary the terms. Obviously, at the start of negotiation, you would look to put a break clause in maybe, so you can, if it doesn't work out, you can get released from the contracts and the lease. So there's various things you can put. There are rent reviews as well, that you can put them in there to try and agree a rent further down the road and set the rent for however long. Yeah. The main thing for clients who are, again, if you're taking on a 25-year lease, it's going to be the cost more than anything. Yeah. Making sure, obviously, the repair costs, the insurance costs, the rent obviously is the main bulk of it. Yeah. So again, the business needs to cover that. So there are options in there if the business came to trouble, so you can assign the lease, underlet the lease. So there's various mechanisms in there if anything did happen to the business and it wasn't viable, that you can look at as well if that was needed. So there are options in there.
So if you are going into you're going into business and you're looking at taking on a property, as it is today, would you advise entering into a long-term rental lease, or would you advise buying the property? What's the safest option, do you think?
I think it's business related, isn't it? If they're looking to use the business for the property for their business, then obviously I've had clients who look to purchase property, so that would probably come down to money as well, financing, if they've got the cash available, if they need lending. As Steve said, obviously, if you're taking lending from a bank, they're going to want a lot of requirements, usually security over the property. Yeah. If anything went wrong, they're going to obviously want to try and sell the property to get their money back. Personal guarantees come into it as well, so the director of the company can be made personally liable as well for a certain amount. So there's a lot of various things to consider. And obviously a lease is a bit more flexible, so obviously if it didn't work out, you can come out of the lease, where if you buy the property, you've got to try and sell possibly, or as I say, assign or underlet it to another company.
I suppose you've got the asset, haven't you then? So it's something that you can go into further financing for at some point, or at least be able to return it as an investment.
Yeah, if you do have to sell eventually, obviously capital gains will come into it, so hopefully you can make a profit on the property in time to come. Obviously, if it didn't work out, then it needs to be cautious of the lending side of things. Obviously, if you can't repay the bank, then their security usually kicks in at that point, and something to be aware of.
It's quite a vicious thing once that starts happening, isn't it?
Absolutely,
it's a difficult time. Again, it's just about protecting yourself from the outset. Okay, so I've seen a lot of development going on in our town centre in Grimsby recently. And I mean, you guys at Wilkin Chapman were at the forefront of that. I think we were chatting earlier. Was it 2017? Did you say?
Yeah, it was around that. I think was it 2017?
Yeah, that you moved into that new building. I mean, that was the beginning, I suppose, of that end of town regen way before everybody else. But it's starting to feel like the town's things are starting to happen.
Yeah.
Not everyone's completely sure exactly what's happening, but things are happening, which is better than nothing.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? I mean, there's so many large established buildings, retail and office that are around and boarded up or just being purchased. Or what's your view from property people's point of view?
I mean, it's exciting. I think that's the probably the underlining feeling. I think most people, hopefully, around the town feel. Obviously, being at Wilkin Chapman, we kind of feel like we're in the heart of it a little bit there because we're seeing it every day.
Yeah.
Obviously, yourselves, we were talking about, and I think realistically, we're kind of looking at that thinking, well, if things start to move here and we start to kind of see these buildings, especially our end of town come forward, it can only be a good thing for the town and hopefully it will then have massive wide-reaching positives for our economy locally.
I think the plans, obviously, it's not just going to be business, it's not just going to be shops, is it? It's more of a kind of you come in there for the cinema or anything else. So it's going to be people can bring their families and seeing the changes. I know it's taken a while to get to where they're at now, spades in the ground. But I think what the 2025 group's done, obviously, the positivity that I've tried to create with what's happening, tried to get the message across. I think it's been very positive, and I've been lucky enough to be involved in some of the projects that have been going on and seeing what's happening, and the plans for the hive that's developing now, they look really exciting as well. So hopefully that brings that area of town to life a bit more, and hopefully it'll.
That's important, isn't it? To businesses like yours, and I suppose any business there, that if you're in town, and if it's a town that's doesn't necessarily have to be your clients, but if it's creating a footfall and people are using it more than before, that's so much better for people who work for you and your team and for the economy as a whole, I suppose.
I'm sure. No, it's a difference, obviously, when COVID kicked in. Obviously, the offices were closed, so people gradually coming back into the towns now. The diagnosis centre that's going in the precinct, that's obviously going to bring the footfall and hopefully benefit the businesses in town as well. So, obviously, you've seen the change. It's been slow, but I think we're obviously seeing something happening now. It's exciting times.
Yeah, I think so. I must say, I don't think I've ever been more hopeful than I am now about the schemes and the plans that are. They're not just artist impressions now. There seem to be actual things that are happening.
There's boards up and there's you can hear works going on, can't you? So
that's always
it's nice. Yeah,
you can be walk through town lunch, don't you? You hear a bit of clang going on inside, so you wonder what's going on. So
it's nice to see so much going on. When we first we started clearing asbestos from St James House, there were men in hazmat suits, and they stood out so much as being the only thing going on in town that people thought it was a drugs raid. And that's what oh well, but now no one would think that because there's so much going on. It's a good thing. I have seen because we've been working with some clients, and I'm sure you have, who are looking at buildings in the town centre as they see that. There's a lot of listed buildings in Grimsby, aren't there? A lot of protected buildings that are beautiful, and you want them to be protected, but my word, that's a complication, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Just walking through town, I never really did it when I was younger, but if you just look at the buildings, I mean, especially
looking up,
the McDonald's, the pitch house, but again, that's another complication. If you do purchase a listed building, obviously the consents and licenses you need if you want to make any alterations. So you can't just go in and put a hammer to the walls. It'd be
historic alterations as well. I mean, obviously, what like Ian touched on there, you're looking going forward, but you've also got to be careful going back because you could end up liable for what people have done before. Listed buildings.
That is fraud, but so worth it if you can be part of preserving, I suppose, the heritage. And it's not all bad, is it? I mean, there is lots of help to make sure that you are able to keep the buildings in the style that they are.
Yeah, generally the local authorities are very, very keen to engage with those people who are owning those or buying those listed buildings.
Yeah,
and the systems system's okay, you know, in terms of looking backwards and, you know, and forwards. You know, they want to engage with you with what's been done previously and what's going to be done in the future. And obviously, it's something we do is just to try and tease out and tailor and figure out what's potentially been done by previous owners, whether that be the seller or even people further back, to try to get a feel for, right, okay, have the listed building consents been obtained? Have they gone through the right processes? And then if not, then redressing them. It's not a case usually of us saying to the client straight away, no, you can't buy this, you know, or whatever. You know, there's ways and means, you know, of indemnity insurance and stuff like that, and just actually sitting down with the client saying, look, this is what we've got. And again, if they're gonna sort of engage with the council going forward, because they've got their own plans, especially when you've got sort of, you know, properties that are close to town. Obviously, when you're dealing with, you know, commercial premises that are close, you know, obviously they're usually obviously the ones that you'd be looking at. Whereas I could get properties that were maybe a little bit further afield, and then particular types, you know, mills and stuff like that out in the country side can be listed.
And it's so important that they stay that.
They've got to. They're beautiful.
We've seen in the 70s, we kind of flattened so much of what was our heritage.
There's some really beautiful properties that have come across my desk that have been listed, and you touched upon it. You know, those people buying it, they're buying it for a reason. You know, and it's such an investment on their part that they, you know, really for them personally, I think, to say, right, well, I'm going to own this. Whether it be a mill or a old farmhouse or weird and wonderful things that they have. The legal system around it is really good. You know, there's listed buildings, but there's also conservation areas. And obviously then when you're looking at the countryside, you're sort of looking at areas of natural beauty and stuff like that.
You just got to be conscious of that, haven't you? When you're going when you find that gorgeous 18th century property, then you should take heed that that's going to have some certain restrictions if you want to be living in it. That you've got to deal with, I imagine. And it's you mentioned this a bit earlier. I'll just come back to this. You mentioned about COVID. Now, one of the things we've seen is the impact on how people are using properties, both their home and offices. And there's been a real societal shift in that. You see the debate that goes on about whether you can work from home or whether you should go back to the office. So, you know, I'm going to ask you, what's your thoughts about that? Should we all be piling back into offices, or is home working the way forward? What do you think?
We do hybrid, don't we? Yeah. So we do 2 days at working from home at the minute and the rest in the office. People do different. People might come to the office 5 days a week. I think it's what people prefer. I personally prefer the mix of being able to have the 2 days. Obviously, prior to that, the 5 days I think got fed up with that. I'd like to be in the office, to be honest with you. A bit of collaboration with my colleagues, and just staying at four walls at home can get a little bit. I don't mind the 2 days, but I know obviously big business are trying to drag people back in 5 days a week. I'm sure there'll be a bit of kickback on that, I can imagine, given what's gone on for the last 5 years. But I think it works. Productivity-wise, I don't think there's been any knockdown in productivity from the people who we work with. But
it's been quite a revelation, really, that before COVID, we didn't think we could possibly do it, and then suddenly we could all do it.
Apparently, obviously, you speak to people who've been doing it for 10 years prior as well, and you're like, I've been doing it before. So I didn't realise. So,
the hybrid model, I think, really works well for our sector. I mean, as I said, like Ian touched on, I think in our offices, everyone does slightly different, and the problem we have, I suppose it's an advantage, is that within our one firm, we have so many different departments and you know, so many different types of work. So some people may very rarely see clients. Some people may need to have sort of client engagement many times a day. Personally, I quite like a hybrid of being able to sometimes lock myself in at home and do some, you know, difficult listed buildings and stuff like that. But it's equally, I think it's really important, not just for our business, but then also for the economy to have we need a footfall in the town, and we know we need. I think it helps our staff, in my opinion, in terms of having those individuals in the office. I think it'll be the same when I started, getting that experience from more experienced colleagues. And you can't get that, I don't think, to the same degree working from home, picking up the phone.
There's a big difference, isn't there, between a conversation in a corridor and going on to teams and planning it to have that. It changes things.
I spent 5 years sat next to one of the most experienced colleagues I've ever worked with, and just being able to pop into his office, it's always the thing. First year, probably in every day, and then slowly it dwindled. But then there's always occasions where you need to bounce stuff off in our line of work. But then you pick things up as well, hearing people on the phone. So I think it's important for our kind of junior colleagues coming through that they pick up those little bits from ourselves and obviously people that are more experienced within the firm.
You can't replace that, can you? The whole set of soft skills that you develop and communication, and as you say, learning from just chatting with people that happen to be in the same building, you definitely can't get that sitting in even if you're lucky enough to have a separate office space in your house, you can't get that from there or on the screen, I suppose. It's very interesting. And of course there are people, many of your clients, I imagine, your clients in particular, who can't work from home because they are in retail or hospitality. There are some industries, or engineering. There's some parts of some jobs that you definitely have to be in for.
Yeah, I think obviously all the jobs are different, aren't they? So if you don't have the option, then obviously you need to be out doing the job and doing the work. But if you have the option to do it, then as we've seen, I think with the developments in town, I think, as you said, it's a move away from purely office and retail, and more entertainment and experience is probably the way to go. What we've seen in other cities as well. So
that's interesting, and I wonder if you've seen that across all of your portfolio. It does feel that people have bemoaned the idea that retail is no more shops around in towns like ours up and down the country, but actually retail was a kind of 1980s phenomenon that town centres didn't used to be that, but then suddenly retail took over, and now retail have rescinded, and we're replacing it with something else. Do you see that happening?
It can work. I mean, I think probably closest to us is Lincoln. There's been obviously before COVID as well. I was lucky enough to work in our Lincoln office for nearly a couple of years, and it was always happening, but it's really started at that point. Probably about 2016, 2017, and now I went for my birthday about a year ago, and all the different bars and cinemas, and it's completely changed. And not just that, like theme bars as well. The really quirky things. You kind of look and think, wow, I didn't even know that existed. Let alone and I think that's nice to see. And as you said, I think it's probably looking at it from a wider approach and saying, well, actually, wait a second, we might be losing shops, but we're gaining something else. There's definitely something else happening in certain places, and maybe that Grimsby are catching up on that, and we can see that maybe coming.
I think so. I think the youth zone as well that's taking place out of the road. I mean, that's going to be. Went to a meeting back in, I think it was late last year, where the talked about that. I wasn't aware of exactly what was happening, but the thing's going to bottom for the younger generation. I think that's going to be great. That's going to bring them into town as well. So again, footfall and experiences for them. That's going to be. And
bring them into town in something that's constructive and something that is good for them and good for their own development. So it's quite a positive. And I must say, we've seen a lot of changes in the way people are viewing town. So offices in town, even living in town centres is starting to become a thing. And when people are looking at starting up businesses in the town centre, it's more about activity. I think we had it's been in the news recently about climbing.
My daughter likes climbing. She was really interested in that, because again, we have to travel to a whole place like that. Where if that came off, that'd be
amazing,
great.
Isn't it?
It would.
That's what town centres, whatever brings people in front of the. I think you said the word experience, and that's what it's about. Not just shopping, but a destination to go to entertain. That's amazing.
It's the old style. Well, I say old style, but shopping centre, I suppose, to a certain extent, where you've got everything under one roof.
Absolutely.
Now we just might not always have a roof. It might be out and about.
And it might not always be shopping. So it's just a town centre now. Which, if we go back to the time that those leases were written, we were talking about, that's what town centres were. That's when everyone came together and met up with lawyers and doctors and dentists and probably not climbing walls at that time. I didn't think that was...
climbing buildings, maybe,
Okay, so... I just wanted to get quickly before we sign off a bit of advice from you. When you are starting out a business, or when you're looking at taking on your first property, either buying or on a long-term let, there are always issues that you face that you weren't expecting, it seems. So if you were advising a business who was just thinking about that and thinking about going for the first a property for the first time, what are the if you were to give them 3 bits of advice, 3 things, say, look, whatever you do, whether you engage with a solicitor or a conveyancer or whatever, these 3 things are things you need to be certain of before you sign anything. What might those be?
From my point of view, commercial clients, obviously, if I'm dealing with a lease, say, or a purchase, due diligence, so obviously finding as much out as you can about the property. So that might be searches, obviously looking at the title deeds, seeing if there's any restrictions on there that might restrict the use, the cost of taking on a lease or buying the property, so funding, if it's funding or if it's cash injection from the business. Then obviously obligations going forward, as Steve said, looking into the future. So repairing obligations. If you're taking on a property and it's a shell, then it's not too bad. But if you're taking on a property where it needs a lot of work doing to get it up to a condition that it's viable for the business, then obviously you're going to want some kind of limitation on repairing when you come to end the lease. So you don't want to put it in any better repair than it was when you took it on if it's in a bad state of repair. So that's probably a few things. There's a lot more you can probably take into consideration. Roofs are a big one. If it's a whole building, then again, if you're just taking an internal demise, then landlord hopes you take care of the building side of it. But if you're taking on a whole building and purchasing the building, then you're going to own the whole lot. Then roof and foundation would be
always the expensive
a big one. Yeah, they are usually. Yeah, so I guess a survey before you purchase property, making sure you undertake one of them just to make sure there's nothing unbeknown that you're going to be finding out a few years down the road.
Okay, so it's just being cautious, as enthusiastic as you are.
Yeah, I mean,
just make sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know people want things done really quickly, but if you can just take a step back and find out as much as you can about the property you're taking on, whether it's a lease or you're purchasing, will hopefully put you in a position so nothing comes out of the woodwork that you're not aware of.
That is
not always the case, but best you can cover as many bases as you can.
And I know I'm a very impatient person, and in my office we work on. People remind me that you're now on legal time, Mark. So everything just moves a little bit slower than you want it to, and that's just life. That's the way it is. But in the end, I'm always pleased that that's happened because it saves us a problem later down the line. So that's good advice. Thank you. Okay, we'll pay you.
I touched upon it, I think, earlier, but use and enjoyment. I think it's thinking really. I mean, obviously, for me, most of the time, it's people's homes that we're dealing with, or might be buy-to-lets, etc. But it's use and enjoyment of the property is what I try to drill into my clients. And what are you actually going to want to use this property for? What are you going to want to enjoy the property for? And just what I'm telling you about the property or the surveyor telling you about the property mean you can do that. Yeah. And I think it's probably making sure that you engage professionals that you can have those conversations with, and making sure that you can talk to those professionals. Obviously, there's lots of different solicitors or surveyors you can employ, but I think it's really, really important that you find the right fit, but then actually find someone who appreciates that. Appreciates that. I said earlier, you're buying a massive asset, maybe the biggest asset you will ever own, or before. Hopefully, maybe in some instances you buy another one down the line. But they understand what you want to use and enjoy that property for.
And that so often you can get caught up in the enthusiasm of wanting it. I mean, again, that's me a lot. You'll see something, you think, oh, no, that I could really... And you start to almost fantasize about what you could do with that property and what it'll look like, when actually the truth is, when you get underneath it, it's not suitable, it's not the right location, it's probably too expensive, and it's listed, or something along those lines, which are going to destroy your dreams anyway.
Can you do what you want to do? And as I said, I'm... probably sounds slightly corny, but I always think with my clients, it always works out how it's supposed to. Obviously, in residential property, we do come across a little bit more, not often, as maybe people think, where things don't work out, or they decide, like you said, it's not the right location, or something else comes on the market. And there's been loads of times people have said to me, I've had it in personal experience, where something hasn't worked out, but then when it does work out, it's like, oh, I'm really pleased it did. If that other one had come off, then actually maybe that wasn't for me. This one actually is. So it's nice. Probably a nice point to end on, to be perfectly honest. Well, but it does work out like that. I think quite a lot of the time. I like to think so anyway.
And I suppose that we take on people like yourselves to be our professional cynics to some degree. So when you do get through all that and you find the right property for the right person for the right reason, whether that's commercial or private, then yeah, you're right. That's a great outcome for everyone, really, isn't it?
It's a lovely part of the job, and obviously something I really enjoy with the private individuals, because it's people's homes we're dealing with, and you know, it's sometimes taking a step back and actually remembering that, saying, actually, this is really important for those people. Something, it's difficult to forget once you start down that path.
Yeah,
it's good.
It's a big impact on whole families. So that's a big thing. Excellent.
Awesome.
Guys, you know, it's been really insightful talking to you both. And when it comes to, and it's a lovely note to end on, because we can all get a little bit tied up in the whole legalese and annoyance of trying to get the thing you want over the line. But when it comes down to it, you are fighting for exactly the same thing as your clients are fighting for. And that's the right property at the right time, at the right price, I suppose. So thanks for giving us an insight into that. It's been really, really interesting and engaging. So thanks a lot.
I enjoyed it, Mark. Cheers. Appreciate it. Thank you.